and welcome back for episode 35 of Pursuing the Perfect Pint podcast. And this week we're back in Denmark. And what's really great about this episode, it's regenerative throughout the supply chain, from farmer through trader and through the maltster as well, and hearing all the perspectives across the supply chain. So really interesting episode to listen to.
Yeah, collaboration at the heart of regenerative ag.
There you are.
From in a Danish with a Danish flair, which is good. And as people hear when they listen to it, Danielle, I guess the key takeout is there's some great examples here around that collaboration that we mentioned, and the fact that we've got people like Soren, who we'll hear from, totally dedicated, 25 years of experience. I think as you say, there's an amazing story there that I think people can learn a lot from.
Absolutely. But before we go into that, Brent, are you weatherman this week or are you a political man this week?
Well, the heat wave continues. So here in Switzerland, and spent some time in Italy recently, and 35-degree temperatures. You've got hot temperatures in the UK. So I guess weather still dominates the storyline, but we still have this geopolitical risk. So on the screen, I had shared, and I posted this last week, the World Bank gave us a little bit of a pictorial of what we've been going through. So they put this index together of geopolitical risks, and we're at the highest level in the last 40 years. We kind of knew that already, but I guess it was interesting for me to see it put in a graph. I love graphs, so I think that was good. So that's still ongoing. Russia, Ukraine keep blowing up each other's infrastructure. A lot of it's targeted on the energy infrastructure, but unfortunately, the grain infrastructure gets caught up in the crossfire. So we've seen disruption to exports of wheat, for example, out of Russia. That is having an impact on grain markets. So this is coming to the forefront. And on top of that, we've got the weather and just the heat wave that just seems unrelenting. You mentioned it. The UK hasn't had rain in forever, and I think most of Europe, certainly Western Europe, France, Spain, dry. UK, at least the southern half of the UK is dry, and we're seeing the impact.
And they had wildfires all across Europe as well, given this extremely dry weather.
Top of it. And you were asking when we were prepping for this, what's the impacts on the crop? As I've said in previous episodes, I think we got a little bit lucky. I think the barley crop, generally speaking, was far enough developed when the heat wave really kicked in, and there is a little bit of impact, yield down, depending. We'll see the final results soon, but the range has been 10 to 15% drop in spring barley yields as a idea. The crop is very, very dry, which is good for storing, but it will need, for malting barley, some changes probably to processing of that very dry barley. It'll be very storable, as I say. Protein slightly higher, and the size of the kernels will be down. So extract in a brewing sense will be down slightly. So, but I guess in a way I say we've kind of avoided a real train smash, if I say it that way, for barley. I think the bigger impact is really the fact that the corn crop in Europe will be stressed. Is being stressed. Yield will be down, and that will raise the whole price landscape. So this week's journal will talk about a tide floats all boats, and we're going to see that in grain markets, that the drought, maybe we've missed it in a way for barley, but barley will be pulled along with the tide of grain prices because of this prolonged weather pattern.
So as we sit here right now, Brent, are you thinking people who've locked in their prices are in better situations than those who are?
Yeah, I think so. I don't think there's not in my mind, I guess you're saying prognosis wise, it would be hard to envision that we can see a lot of downward pressure from this point. So harvest will continue and go forward, and we might see prices stay rather steady. They are steady at the moment. So I guess that's probably a bit of the annual harvest cycle weighing a bit on the markets. But that harvest period will soon be done, and then it'll be interesting to see how do markets react. And you see influences from other factors, investment funds, hedge funds that buy grains as a as a speculative venture. They have been, say, the U.S. example, they've been buying, and I guess in Paris as well, they've been entering on the buy side, so they're looking for upside.
And I think I was thinking as we were chatting, preparing for this as well, I think maltsters who have sort of quite a global footprint can be this in sort of the theme of collaboration. Places like Australia who are experts in dealing with barley post a drought could be providing lots of the
sharing of best practices and those things. But the other thing you just triggered, Danielle, is what also is very strange in this. The weather situation is very, very much a European problem. If I look at it all the time, if I look at the crop in Canada, a major barley area, we talked about it recently, it looks quite good. There's been scattered rains across Canada. We put that in a positive place. Argentina's a bit late, but they've got more than enough moisture, so that should come through, we would think, reasonably. And Australia's crop looks very, very good. So we've got kind of this dichotomy in the market that Europe's facing struggles, the rest of the world looks pretty good, and a tide floats all boats. I think Europe will lead the price direction, and everyone else will be watching closely the final result in Europe.
Well, and on that note, Brent, if we just now go to another geography where we were enjoying some cooler weather in the midst of all this heat wave, was our trip to Denmark, where we got to hear some really, a really passionate farmer. Every time I hear him speak, it's lovely, Soren, and the support they're getting through DLG, and ultimately to Viking as the maltster from Karl.
So now we're south of Copenhagen, and we're in the farmer's field. So we've got a wonderful array here. We've got Soren as farmer. We've got Simon from DLG, who is working with farmers like Soren to move forward on, we'll call it today, Regen Ag. And we've got Karl here from Viking Malt, who is benefiting from all this work and helping in terms of leaking to brewers and distillers about all the wonderful things being done in Denmark, and we're going to go in and talk about that a little bit more. We're south of Copenhagen. Soren's here to tell us. You are farming, this is Laureate. More importantly, you are a champion of what we would maybe debate, but regenerative ag, or as you've called it, conservative crop production. So first of all, thanks for taking some time. We've got a field. Maybe let's start with a little bit of the field as it looks now. What's your impression? How does it look in your mind today, given the progress so far?
Yes, thank you. We are standing here in the edge of this field here where we have drilled this spring barley in the middle of April. And as mentioned, it is grown under the regenerative definition as Carlsberg and DLG has contracts on. And that means that there are some rules that we have to obey. And one of them is very important, minimum or no tillage. And we have very limited inputs in this field here also. We do a lot of trials, and that shows that we can reduce the phosphorus applications very much. We are also at a lower level for nitrogen appliance here. And I've done a lot of trials showing that if we have good cover crops, we can reduce a lot of the input. And what goes on under the soil surface is also important. We have the fungus called mycorrhiza working in the soil, releasing tied up nutrients and applying it to the plant by symbiosis. But we don't know exactly in how fast they can do it and what amount they can do it, but we are still learning. Yeah.
And you've been learning for 25 years, you said before, so you're well down the path. Not that it's perfected yet, but you are probably, I would say, you're a champion in this, in the sense that you've been doing it for 25 years, and along that way you've learned a lot, but you're not done innovating, trials and all these things. So the job's never done. Is that a fair?
Surely. I've served the plow now it's 26 years ago, and went into minimum tillage, and by learning I reduced the tillage intensity, gone to no-till, and now I'm in a situation where I have learned a lot of this historical way of growing crops. That is very important, that you as a farmer make your own windows or trials to learn how far can I go and also use plant analyzers, sap analyzers, and so on to see what are the results, because there is some breaking point where if you reduce too much, you will reduce yield or quality when it is malting barley. There are some protein and germination regulations that we have to obey. And you have to test and learn instead of just going in one direction. And that is the interesting thing about arable farming. You never get fully educated. You also always have to react on climate. Now we are in a real drought here. We have got very little rain. And the malting barley is at the grain fill stage now. So I hope the root development through the macropores created by earthworms and so on are so deep that they can supply the water.
It would be a very tough comparison to make, but I guess in a way you could say if you weren't doing these agronomic practices, this crop wouldn't be as good today if you use very traditional process. That drought would be more if you stayed with the traditional approach.
Yeah, it's very important that we work on increasing the soil organic matter, that is CO2 coming from the air, increase it into the soil as carbon or soil organic matter, because that increases the content of water. The water delivery to the plant is better. And also the macropores from the earthworms, that makes the roots go deeper. And we had a study PhD here some 5-6 years ago, where we digged down to 2 meters, and the researchers took soil samples out and washed it in the laboratory. And it was clear that no-till barley had deeper roots than plowed neighbor farms had. And that is important in these situations, which we get more and more often in the future also.
Yeah. And you just a minute ago, you said, well, you have to be careful because you can plateau and so on, which is true. But we had a presentation before, which is wonderful. We can get more people to hear that presentation. But the other part on the organic matter side is, on a more optimistic level, you could say by doing this, you can actually have yield gain. If you look at, so you can start to see the true benefits of the work coming through no-till, and actually talk about yield improvement, which would be a wonderful place to get to and explain that to more farmers and bring them along in a similar way to where you are today. So there's one challenge is if you're leading, you need to bring the people behind you along with you, which is not easy. But and I guess I don't want to open up too much, but you could use some help from a regulatory government perspective to try to help bring more people along more quickly. It's not easy.
That's not easy because politicians live in one world and farmers live in another world. But we hope that it will increase in the future. But sharing information between farmers is very important also in this system. But as I say, typically, the thing we can do a lot of when we talk about yield and bottom line and the economy is a machinery cost. Now we have learned here with the crisis in Hormuz that diesel can increase in price very rapidly and so on, and fertilizers also. And when we talk about machinery costs, we can reduce it very much in this. We can reduce it with 50% or something like that. We can't do that with many of the other inputs, not very much at least, but here we have a huge impact. And also, if we talk about yield, there is a transformation process from plowing to this system here, yes. But also, if we reduce the machinery cost, the intensity of it, we can get a better bottom line, even if we would lose some of the yield in the transformation process. But when I go back and look at my statistic in my Excel spreadsheet, my malting barley has increased 27% in yield since I stopped plowing. Of course, it's not all of the system. It's also new varieties, better resistant and so on. But anyway, it shows it goes in the right direction. And that makes me more secure in the future when we are hit by high prices, high input costs, and maybe also more and more weather challenges in the future.
You mentioned as well, barley in general, we would focus on malting barley as a lower input crop. That has a very good position from a farmer perspective. So you would keep barley and ideally malting barley in your rotation because you see a lot of benefits overall to from a cost perspective, but also benefits of spring crops, help you in weed control and these things. So there's for anyone listening to this that's in the world of malt would like to hear that and confirmation of that, because you see spring malting barley in particular has a lot of inherent benefits.
Yeah, rotation is one of the very important issues in this system here. Cover crops is maybe the most important. And when you have cover crop, you also need to have spring crops, because then you have cover crops standing all the winter. And important is, as I mentioned, rotation, and spring barley is an important part of it. And many farmers in Denmark who traditionally grow a lot of winter wheat, and maybe even winter wheat after winter wheat, and even third year winter wheat, they have a big problem with grass weeds, and they have high costs. And the funny thing is that when I say to them, what is the problem with growing spring barley? Its economy is totally bad. We lose economy. So last year, my spring malting barley was much better than winter wheat. And that is not the first year it happened. So, of course, yield is a big factor, but also cost. So on variable costs like fertilizer, herbicides, fungicides, also, of course, machinery costs, it is much cheaper to grow. It hasn't so high yield as winter wheat, no, but you have to look at the bottom line as a farmer. That's what you can pay your bills with.
So you've been on a journey, which is very good to see, and thanks for sharing that. I guess if you had to give advice to anyone considering to go down a similar path with no-till and so on, what in your experience, what has been maybe the major hurdle that you've had to overcome in 25 years? What is one or two things that you say, this, if we could clear some of these things, we could actually even move faster? I don't know if we're going to pick a fight with politicians or not, but that might be the answer. But where would you give advice to someone thinking about going down the path of this no-till journey you've been on?
Just get started. When I took the decision, I realized you can't go 3 years in that, 2 years in that, 5 years in that. And I see a lot of farmers who try and say, oh, it was no good and I had this problem. Then they go back. 2 years later, they try again and so on. You have to realize that here in Scandinavia, not Brazil, they can have 2 harvests in a year. But here we have 1 harvest a year. So you have to take a decision on your strategy. I want to go in that direction. And then you do it 100% and go all in. That is important. Have to focus, do the data on your input cost and so on, and your yield. So you will have clear, without discussion, economy bottom line. And then you can compare it with neighbor farms who are going the traditional way. And then you will realize that it really is a benefit.
So bottom line, it's a commitment. I guess you tell people, set the direction and you have to commit to it, and you can't make short-term assessments of it. You have to be in it for multiple years, and over time you will get to a similar place as where you are.
Yes.
Somewhere.
Yeah.
So well done. Thanks for putting that in language we all can understand. Okay, so we've heard from Soren all the great work he's doing. I guess, Simon, one point would be, what struck me is you need more Sorens. I'm not sure how practical that is. Maybe tell a little bit about the program that DLG's rolling out since 2024, the education of farmers and getting them on board. And I guess we'll start with that because we have some questions around that, with a little bit of where's DLG in the journey that we've heard from Soren.
Yes, it's correct that it's the third year that we run the program now. And Soren, all 3 years together with us, and Soren is inspiring for farmers that have you on and also learn a lot about how he's running things here. And I think that is also important to have the commitment from the farmers in order to also convince, I would say perhaps farmers to switch over to regen barley. Because we see a market and it is on early stages at the moment, and we want to spread out the regen program so we can also scale it up eventually.
Yeah. And one question we had with that was, and you're running up here, you run about almost 300 hectares. But we also, in prepping for this, we also talked, there's a lot of what we would call more agribusiness, kind of a more corporate mindset. And I guess one of the challenges we thought of was those larger operations would be harder to convince to make the commitment to this, because they would have to see the business case for it. So Soren has been doing it because he felt that's the right thing to do, and he's been committed to this for 25 years. How do you convince this other group to get on board?
I think everything is about economy. It can be tough to convince some farmers. Also, if you look on the statistics, it shows if you shift into region barley the first year, you will have less yield, and you need to compensate the farmers for that. So I think if we can maintain a good premium, then it will also be easier for us to secure more farmers into the region program.
Yeah, and this is one of my challenges in a way, I guess, or things I see as a possible solution. What about multi-year contracts? Is that something that's possible in terms of how do you deliver a longer term message to the farmer to get on board with the program? Because annual contracting does not line up with the commitment that's needed, right? The commitment's multi-year, maybe decades even, and annual contracting, I guess, to me falls short of giving direct motivation to farmers of all sizes. Is it possible to move in that direction, or what would you need to get further down that path?
It should be possible, I think, but we also need more in the industry to have the focus on region farming. We need more workers to invest in it, so we can also bring more farmers into it, because at the moment it is quite limited. But I think in the future it should be looking bright, especially if we are able to convince the farmers. And we also have the commitment from the industries. Yes, it should be possible.
So I think we'll move now, we'll go up the chain one more. So I guess, Karl, from your perspective, I guess I put myself in your shoes. The very, very positive part is you've got farmers like Soren that exist. That's a really important first step. And you've got some partners like DLG that are helping roll that out. So that must be encouraging. But what's, in your mind, are we going fast enough, or what would be needed to go faster?
Yeah, I mean, one could argue we're perhaps not going fast enough. Perhaps we are going at the speed. We need the industry all to move at one speed. If everyone moves at one speed, then of course everybody's happy along the supply chain. I think to go faster, there's an element of, nobody wants to dip their toe in the first water and be the first one who's making the mistake or maybe the gain. So there's that's been around for a couple of years like that. But say faster, yeah. On the supply chain, it ought to do that faster.
Yeah. I guess having someone like Soren available, you could dispel some of those concerns about making the first step, because someone's already made the first step 25 years ago. So that should help a little bit.
Yes.
I guess your position is a good one, but also a challenging one.
We sit, of course, very much in the middle of the supply chain, right? Keeping customer obviously happy and in the right place. Of course, we're absolutely.
Everyone's got a purpose. This is in the middle. So
but
I guess you're bringing that message back as much as you can, and you're also feeding it back.
Yeah, exactly. It's a lot about communication, and managing those stakeholders up and down the supply chain in order to get to where ultimately the consumer and the targets are at the end.
And we're in Denmark, of course, and we know there's a major brewer here, Carlsberg, that is positive in the sense that they're on board with the program and they're helping in their way. So that's great. You've got a lot of other customers. So I guess one of your challenges would be how do you get the rest of the brewing community on board? I would add distilling is in that piece as well. So that's not an easy job, but I guess you're already working on that. And I guess it does come down to storytelling. Is that the main thing? Telling the story of what you're working on with the help of your partners, and is that starting to get some
traction? Yeah, indeed. I mean, of course, again, it's back to this collaboration. There's different partners, different customers. Things have slightly different agendas. Generally, the direction, of course, is in one direction. It's about trying to ultimately bring that into more as one uniform direction in order to go further forward and at the right speed.
Well, we talked a lot about complexity, and we're not going to fix that. I guess it's just something we have to manage. You collect a lot of data, and that's great. And I guess you collate that from different farm levels, and so we have the elements of a story. And I guess maybe things like what we do is sharing that story, and we'll do more of that. It is a journey. I think it sounds like we're in a pretty good place.
Yes.
I guess it's my own personal view. I think we could do more, and I think it does come from the top down. I think brewers and distillers need to show in whatever way their commitment. That's why I say things like a multi-year contract or things like that give the message back down the supply chain would actually come back in progress even faster. So
Yeah.
we'll see. I'll keep carrying that flag and beating that drum, but it's a great example of that collaboration. So don't stop doing it. I guess that's be the lesson. So thanks for sharing some of your thoughts. Okay, so I guess in wrapping up, I guess we'll start with you, Karl. In all that you're working on, what do you when you sit at home at night and open a refreshing beer, what are you most proud of in terms of what you're seeing as you advance efforts across barley procurement and the direction that we're headed?
And ultimately, so far, I tell you specific about more collaboration, but being within the middle of this supply chain and what we've done so far to bring farmer, supplier together to customer, and the point that we are today, I think we should be fairly proud of that, and the data in various points and principles we've agreed on so far. That's probably, yeah.
And if I had a magic wand, what was one thing you'd like from the supply chain that would make your job easier?
Probably the do I say the cost element, the premium side of things. Let's say finding the right premium at the early stages and having understanding amongst that principle probably be the.
It is a sensitive topic.
It is a sensitive topic.
It has to be spoken about because it'll end up.
No point to hide from it. It is a sensitive topic. But
when we get over to Soren, it's probably going to be his ask as well. But I think it's important. It's not easy to raise, but it's an important one that has to be spoken about.
Yes.
Okay. Then we'll go up next. Simon, if you think, what are you most proud of when you think of, into your third year, the program and all this from a DLG perspective? What would you stand behind as something you're most proud of?
I think, first of all, I'm very proud to be a part of the project, and also proud that we have scaled it up. I mean, in the beginning, we started with 2 farmers. Last year, we were approximately 7, and hopefully we can continue with that, bringing more farmers in. And one thing is the economy, but you're also doing it different from the environment side. Proud of that.
Very good. And same question, what's the one thing you'd like to see changed or brought to you that would help you go even further faster?
I think, especially now when we are running on the third year, now we have the foundation to scale it up, and we know how to collect the data. We know how to calculate them. So we just need more customers.
Okay, and then last but definitely not least, I guess Soren finished. So you have many things to be proud of. Can you take one of all the things that you might have in mind that you feel quite good about and you would love to share? What's one point that you would be most proud of?
How can I take that in one word? Because it is a big whole picture of biodiversity, resources, climate changes, farming in a new way, and most of all, more interesting farming. That is the things that really make me proud. You are thinking in a new way, and it is always interesting to try to do things different.
And it helps when you can see real tangible benefits. You can actually see the progress. Has to be
exact.
Kind of helps affirm all that. Yeah. So I'll have to change it a little bit. We can't say premium because one thing you'd like to change, I guess we'll have to address the economics and the premium. So beyond that, what would be something you could see as beneficial to getting the whole industry moving together? And I keep coming back to it, together and maybe at a slightly better pace.
I think the most important beneath all we talked about here is the politicians. They are ignoring all the effects of the system here, and it covers all the things that they criticize about farming, but they ignore that we can do it. So wake up, politicians. We've got a new election here, new politicians. I hope they will wake up and make some support. We have the cap system in the EU. Maybe they should not talk so much, but do something.
That we'll do our best. That's a tough one to move, but I think it's probably in the right space. So thanks for that. Thanks to each of you for sharing some of your thoughts. And it's some great work. So just keep going, and we'll keep doing our part to share the story as much as we can. Right? Thank you.
So many takeaways there. I think for my first thought was really how the same speech, and people are going to think we're getting paid by some sort of regen ag, I don't know, board or something, but the need of premiums to drive that improvements, but and to stick to it. You can't sort of go regen ag for a couple of years and then conventional because it didn't work, because then you're doing the sort of worst of both worlds.
Unfortunately, Danielle, I guess there isn't a global regenerative board, so no one's making that decision at a high level. That's probably one of the challenges. But totally. It was really a pleasure to meet Soren and hear the story. I repeatedly called him a champion. I'll have to think of what's another way to describe it. But and we've got Jan up in Sweden doing very similar things. So I guess it's very good. The takeaway I hope people were left with is there's some great work being done. Some people that are very passionate about it. That comes through very clearly in the discussion with Soren. I guess what I kept coming back to is you can't rely on the few to drive widespread change. So how do you scale it up? How do you get more people in the same place as where Soren and others are? I think it's good to have some of those leaders that are blazing the trail over 25 years. But that's a very small percentage of the total farm population. So how do you bring everyone else along? So, and it's still early days, but I guess there's still work to do there for sure.
I mean, the point that Simon made was that there's only 7 farmers now under their sort of regen ag contracts, and if you think about all the work and effort with 7, it's still a long way to go. And then Karl sort of, I suppose, being devil's advocate, are we going at the right pace? Because there's no benefit for one person's supply chain going significantly faster than the others, which again gets back to how does the whole supply chain move at the right pace to move us forward.
Yeah. And Karl talked on it, and we've heard it from others when we were over in other parts of Denmark with Jesper at Fuglsang. The maltsters in a delicate place because they have both customers to deal with and their supply partners like Soren and DLG and all this, trying to keep all that together, try to get that message through. There's some of the commercial sensitivities that were talked about. So not an easy position either for the maltsters, but I think it's a good example that they have a plan, it's being implemented, and I guess anything, if we can share the story, happy to do that. And I guess nice to have some champions to kind of reassure people that, just as Soren said, just get on with it.
Absolutely. And then maybe the final challenge you said is maybe the industry also needs, there's some sort of political, sort of a legislative and regulatory framework that needs to help, because I think we've certainly seen that in the UK. And we even heard about it quite a lot in Denmark. When the government gets behind incentives or frameworks of doing things, it does change behavior across the supply chain, and it can happen quite quickly. So I think that was a good provocation at the end.
Yep, specifically down at a Danish level, but also EU and the cap situation where the payments to farmers could be linked to doing the right farming practices, and I think Denmark's even probably at the front end of that. So there's good examples where Europe could be very much a leader in setting the example how you get there on a wide scale basis.
And I think at the end of all of this, Brent, it's going to be very interesting at the end of this crop with the weather we've been having. I think we heard from quite a few of the Jan, Soren, etc., how their crops have responded better to this prolonged drought period with the deeper roots and better access to moisture. So it'll be interesting to see this year's crop. I don't know, does it change other people's perspectives on embracing regen ag going forward?
Yeah, Soren his yield being up 27%, he gave credit to the people developing new varieties, which is 100% true. But for sure, these farming practices are having a positive impact and actually adding to yield gain, which would be a great story to get more people on board, I think is where it settles.
Absolutely. And so, Brent, as we enjoy this warm weather, where are we off to next week?
We've got some, we're going to go back and visit with some of the people that we had with us in Lisbon. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of the underlying themes that we talked about in terms of the people within the industry and getting them moving in the right direction and so on. And we're going to continue to do some trips. Australia is in our future, along with some technical stuff from Brewers of Europe. So we've got a range of things coming up.
See you next week. Cheers.
All the best. Cheers.